bachelor's in human development family studies with an emphasis in child life from the University of North Texas. I did my practicum, which is kind of like a pre-internship at Texas Scottish Rite Hospital for Children in Dallas. And then I moved to Chicago, the Chicago area, to do my internship at North Shore Evanston Hospital, which was a general hospital, but they also had a pediatric floor. So with this experience, I was able to get a very well-rounded experience visiting all the different floors and units. And this is actually where I was introduced to the palliative floor and the hospice experience. So this is kind of where I really got interested in that. And then right after my internship, I started with VITAS and have been there for almost 6 years next month. I cover about 20 counties ranging from all of Dallas, which includes like Midlothian, Red Oak, all the way up to Little Elm. And then all of our Greenville area as well. So very large territory. And like Dr. Hines said, I work with our adult patients who have children or grandchildren in the home to kind of help them through this process, because it can be, you know, a strange process to them if they've never been through it before, but then also a very difficult process as well. So the objectives for today, in short, like I said, I'm going to be going over myself and my role, then the child development side of things, and then also some activities and stuff that we can talk about, and then leaving plenty of time for questions at the end. So I wanted to start out the presentation with a quick video about children in grief, because I think that this really sets the tone for what we're going to be talking about. And through this video, I think you're going to see a huge difference in the kids who are prepared and educated about the diagnosis and the prognosis versus the kids who aren't. And I kind of want y'all to think in the back of your mind as the video is going of things that stand out to you and why. And then I wrote, of course, all of my notes here, and I'll go through kind of why I feel these things are important. So I'm going to stop this. There we go. Oh, hold on. I need to make sure I have the audio. That's important. And y'all let me know if you can hear the, oh my gosh, hold on, that's still the PowerPoint. Sorry, I'm just trying to navigate all of this. Okay, here we go.
We've all had these technical challenges.
I know, it's a struggle. Can y'all hear this okay?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect.
My name is Adeline, and I am 4 years old and a half. My dad died because he didn't want his heart to beat anymore.
My name is Alex, and I am 14. While my brother was riding a bike, he was hit by a texting driver. A chaplain and a few officers, including my grandma and grandpa, told me about my brother's death.
My name is Phoebe, and I am 7 years old. Then she gave the phone to us so Mommy could tell us that Daddy was dead. I felt pretty sad.
My name is Aurora. I am 9 years old. My uncle died, but I'm not sure how I'm quite sure how he died, because my dad tells me one thing and then my sister tells me something different, so I'm not quite sure what to believe. My mom told me, and she just told me as nicely as she could. I went down to our downstairs and started to cry.
My name is Dominic, and I am 9 years old. And my mom died from cancer. First she had breast cancer, then she had brain cancer. My dad said, "Your mother died this morning."
My name is Jumbo, and I'm 7 years old. My dad died, and he made his body stop working. My mom told me that my dad died. I am Julissa, and I'm 9.5 years old. My father died from kidney failure, cancer, and he turned yellow, which is jaundice. He was in the hospital for like 10 weeks, and he had to go to the hospice house. My mom just woke me up very sweetly, and she said he passed away in his sleep, but he's in a better place now. I felt really sad and didn't want to do anything or talk again, but I figured I had to talk. My name is Julia, and I am 9 years old. My dad died because he had a bone marrow transplant. It was too hard on him, and so in the end, his lungs couldn't really take it much. And so then they stopped working, and he had to get on a ventilator. And Mom told us he had died. Well, I know I just couldn't believe it because, it's like he's there and then he just gone. And I just couldn't believe it, really.
My name is Sam and I'm 12 years old. My dad died of lung cancer. I was there when my dad died. My dad was lying in my mom's lap in the bed. He just took his last breath. It was pretty ready. He was like, yeah. I cried for a while and ran into the next room and called a few friends. My name is Sequoia and I'm 11 years old. My grandpa died from old age. My dad told me that Grandpa was going to heaven because he was dying of old age. I was really sad. I did not know what to do. I just sat in my room and hid my secret spot in my closet. And I had a picture of him on my phone. I just looked at him and looked at him.
Okay. So I think it's so interesting to see how each child, just like adults, they experience their grief so differently. And so being, adults and supporting them, you really have to cater to their needs and what it is that they are experiencing. So one thing that really stood out to me is that there were so many kids in that video that said that their person made their body stop working. And that to me raises red flags, because if the child thinks that their person made their body stop working, does that mean that their person didn't want to be with them anymore or be with their family anymore? Or do they think that their person didn't love them anymore and that's why they didn't want to be here? There are just so many misconceptions that can be brought up with them thinking that. And so when explaining that someone died, it's absolutely okay to say that their body stopped working. And a lot of the times I'll say something like, when someone dies, that means that their body stops working, their brain stops working, their lungs stopped working, their body can't move anymore. But he or she did not die because of anything that you said or that you did, and there was nothing that you could have done to prevent this. So clarifying any of those misconceptions of, did I do anything, or did their body stop working because of something that, I could have prevented, and clarifying any of that. And then afterwards, I would say something like, they died because of their diagnosis, whatever that may be. And go into what the diagnosis is to help alleviate any misconceptions, because it's so common for kids to just know that their person was sick and that's all that they know. Well, then what happens when mom or dad gets sick with the cold or the flu? Are they scared that mom or dad's going to die because they're sick and that's all that they know? And so really going in a developmentally appropriate way and talk about what the diagnosis is and how it affects the body differently than a regular, cold or flu or a regular type of sickness that we can get every day. Then I would say Alex was the next one that really stood out to me. He stated that an officer and a chaplain, along with his grandparents, told him about the death. And so having assistance with telling your child about the death of a loved one is absolutely okay. I do this all the time with families. I would say the biggest thing is that it's really important for this information to come from someone that they love and someone that they trust. So even if you're having assistance with telling them what happened, having a parent or a grandparent or someone that they can trust be there for love and support and comfort and support when they're giving this information is so important, just for that support. The next girl that stood out to me a lot was Aurora. I don't know if you remember her, but she was the one who had mentioned that her family members were telling her different things. And it's so important for adults in the family, whether it's mom, dad, grandma, grandpa, etc., be on the same page with what you're going to disclose with your child, what kind of information you're going to give them. Because especially with younger kids, if anything changes and what you're explaining to them about the diagnosis, they could think that you're lying to them, or they don't know what to believe if anything changes. So be very consistent with what you say and have everybody be on the same page as far as what you're going to tell them and talk to them about. But I think we could all see that there is a huge difference in the kids who were prepared beforehand and involved in the process versus the kids who just had no idea. And giving them that preparation and that education beforehand is so important for their coping moving forward and their closure moving forward. Why is this not going? Okay, there we go. All right, so I'm going to dive in a little bit into my role and how I help support our families and the different aspects of that. So I do a lot of education about the diagnosis, about the hospice process, about grief, coping, and helping parents understand how to best support their children. I prepare for the prognosis and for funeral or whatever type of arrangements they are having moving forward. I provide developmentally appropriate play, and the 3 different types of that are therapeutic, legacy, and medical play. And we're going to dive into this a little bit later. And then the different types of support that I can provide are psychosocial, emotional support, family-centered care, anticipatory grief, bereavement, and I'm able to provide paper resources for family, but then also community resources for families as well. So educating about the diagnosis, like I said, it's so important just to alleviate any of those misconceptions and really hone in on why that specific diagnosis is different from other kinds of sicknesses. And then educating on the hospice process, that's so important too, because when someone comes home onto hospice, there are all these new people coming into the home. There's all this new equipment coming into the home, which can be so scary for kids when they see all the wires and everything that comes along with the equipment coming in. And so really educating on how the equipment is helping their person, whether it's an oxygen machine, well, that's helping your person breathe better and it's giving them oxygen for their body. And so that way it's not so scary just seeing something in their nose and not knowing what it is, and things like that. And then also educating on grief. So some kids have never been through anything like this before. And so when they're feeling those grief feelings, they may not know what it is that they're feeling, or they may feel wrong for feeling the way that they do, or guilty for feeling the way that they do. And so really normalizing those feelings for them, and just kind of validating the way that they feel, and that's okay to feel that way, and that a lot of people feel that way is really important. And then lastly, educating on what to expect from the funeral or the cremation, memorial, or viewing services. So this can be hard because I know there's, some stigma around having kids attend funerals or educating them on cremation. And so this is really something that I kind of let the parents lead on and let me know what they're comfortable with. And then I will help prepare moving forward on what they're okay with. And that's totally fine. It's always, you really want to honor the parents' wishes, because if you push them to say things that they aren't ready for, then that kind of builds distrust between them, and we don't want that. So I kind of let them tell me what it is that they're comfortable with educating on. But I really encourage them to do so, because it helps prepare kids for what they're going to experience, such as what they're going to see or hear or touch when they're at the service. And so they're not really surprised by a whole lot, and they know what to expect. And then a lot of kids, they really benefit from participating in some way in the service. And so whether it's writing grandma or grandpa a letter to put in their casket if they're having an open casket, or painting a picture to put up at the front, and that shows that they're involved, that they care, and that they have some kind of closure and some involvement in everything that's going on, which can really help as well. Okay, so now we're really going to dive into the nitty-gritty of everything, and we're going to go through the different stages of development and how they experience grief. And the first stage is infant and toddlers, and you may be thinking, what in the world? Infant and toddlers, they don't experience grief. But I think you're really going to be surprised at what they kind of catch on to, even at such a young age. And so at this age, death is experienced as a separation. They do not understand the finality of death at this age at all. They just know that their person is no longer there. They notice the absence of them. Changes in routine can threaten an infant's sense of security. They can sense a change through adults' reactions to grief, and changes in behavior or emotions in the adults. And of course, they're unable to communicate their needs at this time. So what we tell caregivers: maintain the infant's normal routine as much as possible. So keep bedtime, snack time, nap time, meal times, all of that the same as much as you can. Meet immediate physical needs and provide extra snuggles to provide a sense of security to the child. And then at this age, how they understand death. Death is experienced as a separation, like we talked about. Any type of change can threaten an infant's sense of security, whether it's change in routine or whatever that may be. They can sense change through adult reactions to grief and behavior and emotions. So for example, if mom is so distraught in her grief and not really dealing with her grief very well, or coping with her grief very well, she could lose her, milk supply. And so the baby isn't able to breastfeed anymore. And that could be a change in the infant's routine, which can cause emotional distress for the infant. That's just an example. And then warning signs of poor coping. Watch for disruption in attachment bonds, and then also regression. So say your 2-year-old is very, very advanced and able to go pee-pee in the potty, and then all of a sudden they're wetting their bed again. That would be a sign of regression that you would kind of look for. Okay, the next one is preschoolers, and this is 3 to 5 years old. So at this age, they have limited concept of death or the passage of time. So they see death as temporary, not final. Same with heaven. They may think that heaven is a place where you can visit, or that their person will come back from heaven someday. They do not understand the permanence of this. And so they may seem indifferent or express immediate sorrow and then forget and continue to play. And that is a positive thing. That shows that they're coping well. If, they run up to you and say, I'm really missing daddy today, and they start crying, and then mom gives them a hug, and then they're like, okay, I'm fine. And they go back to playing. Like, that's a very positive thing, that they're able to verbalize how they feel and show how they feel, but then they're able to continue with the normal routine throughout the day. They may be fearful of being away from their parent or feel responsible for the death, and they may try to bring the deceased back to life through good behavior. They may be able to express feelings and thoughts through their play. So this is really important, and this is a big reason why being a child life specialist, we provide so many opportunities for play through our interventions, because a lot of the times at 3 and 5 years old, they don't know how to express how they feel through verbal communication. And so we give them opportunities for coloring activities or play activities, because a lot of times they will express that through those activities more than they would verbally. So some developmental considerations for this age group is that they are very egocentric. Everything is about them at this age. They're very magical thinkers. And so this is why you see, during this age, pretend play is such a prominent thing. They cannot distinguish between fantasy and reality. And then some things that we tell caregivers: provide your preschooler with reassuring words and abundant play opportunities. Your preschooler may have limited language skills for expressing emotions, so help them by modeling this. So, for example, if you see that your toddler is, not having the best day, maybe going up to them and saying, you know what, I'm really missing daddy today and I'm really sad. How are you feeling today? And see if they notice that you're opening up to them, and maybe they will open up more so to you. Maybe they won't, but it shows them that you're modeling that for them, which is good. Explain to the child that they did not cause their illness, injury, or anything that they thought, said, or wish. So again, this goes back to magical thinking. They could think that because they got in trouble, 2 months ago and daddy spanked them, that's, why daddy died, because they acted out, which is not true, but we have to clarify that for them. At this age, how they understand death. Preschoolers are sensory learners with limited understanding of the permanence of death. At this age, they are magical thinkers, and often their thoughts are more traumatic than reality. So be developmentally appropriate but honest. So for example, this is a good opportunity for us to talk about mommy had cancer versus mommy was sick, because sometimes in their mind, the reality is way more traumatic. And so being very honest with them about that and clarifying those misconceptions for them. It's also common for preschoolers to believe that they caused the death through their thoughts or wishes. So we talked about that already. Some warning signs of poor coping is to watch for misconceptions about the death or the illness. So for example, I made, mommy die through my actions. So watch for that and clarify that as soon as you hear them act that out through their play, or whenever you hear them say that. And then pretend play about injury or illness or death is absolutely normal at this age, because this is them kind of reenacting what happened in their own way and processing that through play. So that is very normal. If you see that, I would just say, if you see them, if you see them playing out any misconceptions through their play, going in and clarifying those for them. And then also if you see that their play becomes very violent, or if language is used during their play, which you wouldn't think would happen, but sometimes it does, maybe that's when you need to seek out some help to see if, maybe they're not coping appropriately, and maybe they need some type of play therapy or some intervention to help them through that. Okay, so now school age. This is age 5 through 12. This is when they begin to understand the finality of death. So they may need education to clarify misconceptions about the diagnosis and the prognosis. They may be self-conscious about expressing feelings and behaviors. They may be concerned or burdened. Concerned of burdening others with their emotions. And so a lot of the time at this age group, this is when I see kids not wanting to talk to mom or dad about how they feel, because they're worried that mom or dad's going to get sad if they tell them that they're sad. And so they oftentimes keep it to themselves or write it in journals or talk to me about it because they're scared to talk to mom or dad about it. They may exhibit problems at school with grades or behavioral outbursts. They often mirror emotional reactions and coping skills of the adults around them. So it's really important, even earlier than this age, but especially at this age, to model those good coping skills and to model verbal communication about how they're feeling, so the kids know that the way that they're acting and dealing with their grief is appropriate, and that's how they should be acting with or expressing their grief as well, if that makes sense. So what we tell caregivers at this age is to encourage healthy emotional expression, answer questions honestly and directly, but in a developmentally appropriate way. Normalize and encourage play, emotional outlets and coping skills. They often show miscommunication through play, so that's where you can step in and clarify those miscommunications when you notice that through their play. Frequently reassure them that they're safe and who is looking after them and taking care of them. So a lot of the times, especially if it's their caregiver who passes away, whether it's mom, dad, grandma, or grandpa, or aunt or uncle, they are really, really worried about who's going to take care of them moving forward. And so really reassuring them that, you know, they're going to be looked after by whoever it is now, and kind of reassuring them that no matter what, they're going to be taken care of, because that can be a huge stressor for them at this age. So just like any other age group, keep routines and normal activities going as much as possible, just to eliminate, you know, too much change. Allow for questions and provide honest answers, and give opportunities to help plan or have part in the funeral or memorial service. And then some signs of poor coping are watch for changes in sleeping or eating patterns, disruptive behaviors, behavioral outbursts, regression, or dramatic changes in school. And lastly, adolescents, I'm sorry. This is 13 to 18 years old. So at this age, they do understand the permanence of death, and they may internalize their emotions a little bit more at this age. They're very self-conscious about their feelings and their behaviors in the presence of peers. So they may act like everything's cool, nothing's going on, even though at home their world might be falling apart. They may isolate themselves from friends or act as if everything is okay. They often lean into friends for support instead of family, which is absolutely normal at this age. They utilize social media as an emotional outlet or ways to express themselves, and they may exhibit problems at school with grades or behaviors if, you know, they're at school and their grief is just kind of all consuming. It might be hard for them to focus on what's going on at school, because that's all that they can think about is what's going on at home. So around the age of 11 to 13 is when children begin to develop the ability to engage in abstract thought. This can lead to many questions about death, faith, religion, and self-identity. Adolescents understand the permanence of death and that everyone eventually passes away. Depending on the personality and the coping skills and the cultural expectations, their response may alternate between very adult-like versus very childlike. Adolescents are often very self-conscious about their peer relationships, so it's not uncommon for them to feel concerned about what would my friends think. So if they're feeling this way, just let them know that that's normal and that's okay. Some things that we tell caregivers are allow for peer support, address risk-taking behaviors promptly, be consistent with rules and routines and discipline, model healthy emotional expression. And then some warning signs for poor coping are watch for social withdrawals, changes in sleeping, eating patterns, dramatic changes in school, and risk-taking behavior. Okay, so here we're going to get into the different activities that we can do with kids and the different types of play that we can do with kids. So this is really the fun stuff. So legacy items. These are projects that may assist patients and families in making items to keep in memory of their person once they're gone. It also builds memory with the patient while they're still here with us. In hospice, we're so fortunate to be able to know that the person is sick and that they don't have a great prognosis. And so we're very intentional on giving these types of opportunities so they have things in memory of their person once they're gone. So some examples of legacy activities could be ink prints, whether it's handprints or thumbprints. I also do some hand molds with families as well, where it's like a casting mold that we put their hand into, and it forms around their hand, and then it dries and you take it out and you're able to peel it away, and it's like this actual mold of their hand. It's pretty cool. We also do voice recordings and videos, so that way they have things to keep in memory. of them. And a lot of the times the voice recorders we'll put inside of our memory bears, which are here at the bottom. And these are actually made out of our patients' clothing. And so we tell the kids, pick something that you remember your person wearing. So when you're cuddling with your bear, it sparks a memory for you on when you remember them wearing that. And then we'll put the voice recorder inside. So that way, whenever they're missing them, they can snuggle with their bear and listen to their voice. Another one that I really like to do are letters and cards for the future. So this is something I actually even started for my son. He's only 2, but I thought it was such a cool idea. And you can write letters or future cards. So like future wedding cards or future birthday cards or future first baby cards. So that way, if anything were to happen, they have these things to open up and you're still with them on these very special days. And so I started this because even if I am here, like this is something that I can give him and say, I wrote this for you years ago, and I just wanted you to have it today. But then if something were to happen to me in the future, he has these for those big special days. So I think that one's really cool. And then scrapbooks, that's another legacy item that we do for families. Okay, so therapeutic activities. There are so many therapeutic activities. So I kind of narrowed it down to some of my favorites and the ones that I use most often. But these are activities that assist in emotional expression with kids, and they may express more through these activities than they would through us just talking. And so some of these activities that I really utilize, these could be also coping skills too for kiddos. So like the calm down jar, that's a coping skill activity that I do to help them when they're feeling their big grief emotions. They can use their calm down jar to help, calm themselves down. Mask of emotions, memory focused crafts. So once their person is gone, we might make a memory lantern if they're having a hard time sleeping at night, or memory blankets or pillows. A lot of the times we'll make a I remember book of all their favorite memories, because some kids really struggle with, well, as I get older, am I going to forget them? Am I going to forget all these memories that we made together? And so writing them down can really reassure them that, you'll always have this. You can go back and look at it, and that way you'll never forget those big special memories. And then there's some grief and emotional outlet games. Questions Jenga is a really fun one. And kind of what I did for this, they have some pre-made that you can already buy, but I just bought the plain Jenga pieces, and on each one, I wrote a emotion. And so that way, every time they pull out a Jenga piece, they read off their emotion, and we talk about a time that they felt that way. So good, bad, indifferent. And that way, it opens up that door for communication. Doggone Grief is a really good one too. It's a board game, and it's all about grief and coping skills. So I use that one a lot. Emotions Uno is very similar to Questions Jenga. And then I do bubble and letter releases as well as balloon releases. So I started out doing more balloon releases than anything, more than anything, because our kids love balloons. But a lot of parents were like, I don't really feel okay with letting balloons go into the environment. So I came up with a bubble release where I got dissolvable paper off Amazon, and we would write a letter to their person on the dissolvable paper and then put it into the bubble ones that they have, and their letter dissolves in the bubbles, and then they can go outside and blow bubbles to their person whenever they're missing them. So that's really cool. We do some feeling hearts activities and memory boxes. And then on this page are some examples. So
Sarah, could you go back and explain what the first 2 are a little more? Because
sure.
I don't
So
know
the
what
mask
a
of
calm down
emotions
jar is, or a mask of emotion.
So it's actually on this page that I was going to go over. Yeah.
Okay.
So this up here, this purple jar is a calm down jar. And so what we do is I typically have them pick out beads, pom-poms, and then glitter. And on a piece of paper, I'll have them pick out 3 different color beads. And those usually represent our memories of our person. Then I have them pick out 3 different colors of pom-poms, and those represent our grief feelings. And then the glitter represents our coping skills. And so we go through, and each color represents something. And so by the end of this, not only is this an activity that they can use to shake really hard when they're frustrated, or if they just need some time to calm down and be that by themselves, they can go and watch all of their pieces float around inside of their calm down jar, but everything means something to them. And so it kind of has a dual purpose. And then the mask of emotions, there are so many different ways to do this, but this example over here, the paper plate of emotions, that is just one example to help kids understand the different grief feelings. And then they can pick which different grief feelings they are feeling, and we make masks out of them. And so that way it's something they can keep and use, and then it's also educational. This one below the mask of emotions, I made this as an example for a memory jar. And on this one over here, I put pictures of my grandma who passed away. And then on this one here, on the little hearts, I wrote out some memories that I had with her. And so what we do is we use glitter or Mod Podge or tissue paper or Mod Podge to make these memory lanterns. And then you can, after they're dry, you can put a little candle inside, and at nighttime, it can be like a nightlight for the kids. So if they wake up having bad dreams or they're having a hard time going to sleep, they can turn on their memory lantern and look at all the special memories they have. And sometimes that can kind of help them. And then this up here, the inside of my heart, this is just another memory activity where we make a puzzle pieces out of the heart and write some of their favorite memories in them. The one below where it says, I feel my grief. This is one where I educate. This is one where I educate on grief feelings, and not only can you feel those emotionally, but you can feel them physically sometimes too. And so going through and talking with them about their emotional feelings, and sometimes do you feel those in other places in your body? So for example, when you're really stressed, you feel it in your heart, or when you're really sad, you feel it in your tummy to where your tummy hurts or something like that. And then they'll go through and they'll label on the body where they feel those emotions. And we'll talk about that and some coping skills that they can do to kind of help alleviate that. And then the last one over here is a balloon release, where we write a letter, attach it to the balloon, and let it go. And that's just an alternative for the bubble release. Okay, so the next is bibliotherapy. So if you've never heard of bibliotherapy before, it's the use of books or poems or other forms of literature for therapeutic, educational, or preparational purposes. So the books that I listed here are books that I use most often with kids to kind of help normalize what's going on with them, whether it's their grief feelings or whether it's, preparing them for their person to die, or whether it's preparing them for or educating them on the diagnosis. I can use these along with my education to help them understand in a way that's appropriate for them and relay back to something that's appropriate for their age. And so I listed some on here that are kind of my go-tos. So that way, if y'all ever wanted to go back and get some of these would probably be the ones that I suggest going to first. So I actually, I wrote out a list, and I think I actually put more on the list than what's on here, and it's going to be emailed to each of you afterwards. And so if y'all want to go through and look at them, I get most of mine off Amazon. But I know that they have them at half price books as well, for the most part. The one that says, I Wonder What You Do on Your First Day in Heaven, that's actually a pretty expensive book. I think I paid like $50 for that book the first time that I bought it, but then I found it at half price books like a couple of weeks later. And of course it was like $5 there versus Amazon for $50. So you can kind of use your own judgment on that and decide where you want to purchase those from if you decide you want to purchase them.
Yeah, and I have that in a document, so we'll send that at the end. Yeah.
Perfect. Awesome. And then I use these guided journals more so for teenagers. So if there's a teenager who just does not like talking about his grief, his or her grief, which is very normal for that age, a lot of the times we'll give out a guided journal to help them express kind of what they're going through in a written form. So especially with teen boys, I may say, you know, do you like writing in a journal? And they would say, no, I don't like writing in a diary. Are you crazy? And so I'll be like, okay, well, why don't we look at this? This isn't a diary. It's kind of like a workbook where you go through questions. And that way, you know, if you're really engulfed in your grief that day and you can't really think of what you want to say or how you want to express it, this has questions for you to answer. So you don't have to think about anything. You just go through and you work on it, and it can be really helpful in that way. And so my favorite is Fire in My Heart, Ice in My Veins. I use that one a lot. And then also down here towards the middle, Wreck This Journal. I use those a lot for kids who are really angry with their grief. So this journal, Wreck This Journal, is all about letting their anger out on the journal. So that way they aren't letting it out in inappropriate places, like on their brother or at school, with kids at school, or having behavioral outbursts at school, or whatever it may be. This is a tool for them to use at home. And then some resources I put up here for you guys. So this one here, Bereavement Reactions of Children and Young People by Age Group. This is a Word document, or not a Word document. It's a paper resource that I give to families often. And I'm going to actually pull it up here for you guys, because kind of like how I was sharing with you guys earlier, the developmental considerations for each age group. Hold on. This goes through that as well, but in a paper form. So if there's a family member who is just really struggling with how to help their child, I may print this out for them because it goes through everything with them, things to look for, what's appropriate for that age group, and it goes by age group. So babies and toddlers, how to help them. Then it goes into preschoolers. So this is a great resource to print off and give families. So that way, if they're ever wondering, you know, is this appropriate, or is my kid just, you know, is this something that I need to be worried about? They can go back and look at this and see if it's a common reaction, how to help them through that. And if it's not something that seems to be a common reaction, they can seek out help for that child.
Sarah, if you have a family who says, should we allow our child to attend the funeral, or, you know, they really request your advice, what do you say to them?
So I always say, well, first I would ask, you know, what type of funeral is it going to be? Is it going to be open casket, closed casket, and kind of go from there. And I always tell them to educate the child first on what that is going to be like. So let them know that if it's an open casket, they may see their person, which means that they may not look the same like they did when they were alive, and go through all of that with them on why their body changed, what they may feel like if they go up and give them a hug or a kiss, that there are going to be a lot of people there coming up to them and hugging them and giving them, you know, all the preparation for what that will be like. And then asking the child, you know, how do you feel about that? Do you feel okay with going? If the child says, yes, I'm okay, I always suggest having a designated person there to take the child out of the room and into the hallway to do something else if they get overstimulated or overwhelmed. But for the most part, I would say ask them, because a lot of the times kids know what they're comfortable with and what they can endure. And so as long as they are prepared and they know what's going to happen, I would say y'all talk about that and y'all decide as a family what is best, as long as they're prepared. Now, if parents are just like, you know what, I don't know, I don't feel super comfortable with it, I don't push it, because a lot of the times parents, you know, they know what's going on at home and they know their child better than me. So if that's a concern for them, I would say absolutely stick with your gut. But a lot of the times preparing kids for what that's going to be like can help alleviate a lot of the concern. And so kind of go from there. Does that answer your question? Okay, perfect. And then down below this paper resource that I just brought up, I listed 3 grief groups, in the area. So Journey of Hope is a grief center in Plano, which I refer kids to a lot in addition to my care. This is more of like a peer support group. And right now they're doing only Zoom classes for the kids. And then Grief Works for Kids is a faith-based grief center in Dallas. And I'm not quite sure what they're doing at this time. I don't have as many families go to Grief Works as they do for Journey of Hope. That seems to be the more popular one. And then the Warm Place in Fort Worth is also a grief center in the Fort Worth area, but they are only offering in person. And so right now they're not taking on any kids because they're, waiting for COVID to kind of die down. But once they start up again, everything will be in person for them. Oh my gosh, why is this not? It's not letting me move forward on that one.
I just had a young adult male tell me how helpful the Warm Place was when his father had died.
Really?
So,
oh my gosh,
spent a
I
lot
hear
of
such
time
good
at
things.
The Warm Place, yeah. And I didn't know exactly what it was, but now I do.
Yeah, I've heard such good things about them. So I'm glad to hear that they had a good experience. That's awesome. I have a friend, she's a child life specialist for community hospice in Fort Worth, and she sends a lot of her kids over there. I don't see as many kids in the Fort Worth area, but if we do get a family in Fort Worth and for whatever reason they need more support than what I can give, or if they're just kind of looking more so for a peer support versus a one-on-one support, I refer to them sometimes. But for the most part, my kids are in the Dallas area, so I haven't had as much contact with them as I have with Journey of Hope, but that's good. Okay, so I am able to get some education hours from doing a presentation. And so I sent Pastor Adam this form to sign. If you guys don't mind, if it's too much trouble, don't worry about it whatsoever. But if y'all wouldn't mind signing this form down here where it says participant's name and emailing it back to me, that way I can give it to the Child Life Council so they know that I was able to do this presentation for you guys and I can put it towards my education hours. That would be awesome. But like I said, if it's too much trouble, do not worry about it. But that's going to be in the email that's attached with the bibliotherapy and all of that. That's going to be going out later as well.
I actually just sent it.
Oh,
and
awesome.
I forgot
Awesome.
I just sent it and I forgot the bibliotherapy.
Oh.
I'm gonna add it. So,
okay.
Sorry. You're getting 2 emails.
All right. Well, now I wanted to open it up for questions that you guys may have. I know that going through this, there's just so much information, and even beyond what I presented to you guys, there's just so much information because it's really individualized per family and per child and what they're going through and what the diagnosis is and all of that. And so if you guys have any questions for me, I'm happy to go through that with y'all.
Well, first, thank
You're
you
welcome.
so much. That was really
Oh, good.
insightful.
I'm glad.
And just even thinking about breaking down I even think it relates. I'm wondering in terms of how do you find that you're breaking down, the different age groups. And so, for instance, if a toddler is coming into adolescence and they haven't necessarily dealt with those, you see kind of some not good coping, characteristics coming out. How do you catch that? And are there indicators and things you're aware about for those kind of different ages, and they bridge and maybe even grow or are unsettled?
Yep, absolutely. So a lot of these age group, each age group is not cut and dry. They kind of cross over, like you said. And so, like I said earlier, everything is so individualized per family, but a lot of the times with poor coping, I would say things that I look for are they failing their classes in school when they weren't before? Are they having behavioral outbursts at school, like fighting with other kids or yelling at teachers? I had one kid who was stealing stuff from school, and that was just his way of acting out because he didn't know how to deal with his grief. So that was something that I've encountered. Unfortunately, I've seen a lot of suicidal ideation, which of course we have to address very promptly. And a lot of the times with that, that's outside of my scope of practice. So I have to get involved with getting them to a psychologist or a psychiatrist or a licensed counselor to help them really navigate through that, because that can be really difficult. But I would say those are some of the biggest things, along with even something as simple as crying all day long. So it's very normal for kids to cry and to be sad. That's a very, very normal thing, and that's okay. But if they're crying all day to where they can't function throughout the day, that would be a red flag for me as well. Some kids have like night terrors to where they just can't sleep, and that's something that is constant for them versus, you know, just every once in a while, which, you know, even for me that happens every once in a while, but is that constant for them? And just things like that, things that are very abnormal, and it seems to be all consuming to the point to where they can't function on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Sarah, this is Charles. I wanted to say thank you also. This was a great presentation. I actually wanted some of those recommendations for my own grieving, so I'll look into that.
Yeah.
But I wanted to ask you about how long does in general, I think, and I know everyone's different, but how long does a successful coping experience, how long does it take to establish that?
I mean,
with the different children.
Everybody is just so different. I typically start out by educating that usually the first 3 months of your grief are the absolute hardest, because you're trying to navigate all the new changes. You're dealing with all these different and new feelings that you're experiencing. So the first 3 months are really difficult, and that's where it's really important to start establishing those coping skills. So that way, when they're in the midst of this grief storm, they have these tools to pull from and to start using throughout the rest of their grief process. And hopefully after those 3 months, it starts to settle down a little bit. And that may not be the case for everyone, and that's okay, because everyone's so different. But help establish those as early as you can, so that way they can start using those as soon as possible. And I mean, some kids, you know exactly what it is that helps them. Like, I just need to go out and play with my friends. I need some distraction. I need to get out of the house so I'm not thinking about it all the time. And some kids really need help with knowing what it is that they can use as coping skills. And so sometimes when I go in and I'm educating kids on what coping skills are, I'm like, okay, well, what are some things that y'all like to do? So when you're really sad, what's something that comforts you? When you feel like talking to someone, who is that one person you can go to and talk to that makes you feel validated and makes you feel heard? You know, when you're at school, if you can't concentrate at school, what is it that we can do to help you kind of release that, so you're able to go back into class and concentrate a little bit better, whether it's going to the bathroom and crying for a second, or getting some water, or going to the counselor, and just giving them some ideas to kind of help them with that. And of course, over time, their coping skills are going to change. And so talking with them about that often and letting them know, you know, going outside and playing basketball might help you today, but in a couple of months it might not. So let's continue to talk about this so we can help you throughout this process.
There's a couple of comments in the chat. I don't know if people would like to speak to them, or
I can't see the chat.
Oh, you can't?
No, hold on. Let me see if
no.
Oh, here we go. Okay. Yes. So Dr. Hines had mentioned, you know, if a family has a toddler, a preschooler, and a teenager in the same home, what does that look like? Can y'all hear me okay?
Alice, can you mute? I think there might be a feedback, or she might be.
Yeah, I heard that too.
Okay.
Is that better?
Yes, there's a little bit,
okay.
But
let me mute and then unmute. Okay, is that better?
Yeah, I think they're frozen, and I'm guessing they're muted. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, so if there are multiple age groups in a home, what I typically do is divide them up into their own visit. So I'll meet with, the toddler first, the preschooler second, and then the teenager third. So that way it's developmentally appropriate for them. And that way, if I'm meeting with all three of them, the toddler's not going to understand what the teenager understands. And then talking with the toddler, the teenager is going to sit there and be like, okay, like I feel like I'm in a kindergarten class or whatever. And so really individualizing those visits for them, so that way it's appropriate for them and they feel most comfortable with talking with me. So seems like so I don't have any resources specifically for that. I just typically talk about, good communication more so than anything with the caregiver and the child, and starting that as soon as possible, because as soon as you establish good communication between the two of you, that establishes trust, which then you can start those harder conversations or those tougher conversations in an easier way, because you've already established that good communication between you two. So, and then also you mentioned here, even if they're not grieving. So a lot of the times, I don't think I really talked a whole lot about anticipatory grief, but we see that a lot, especially with kiddos on hospice. And so you can start talking about the grief process before the person dies, and kind of, you may be experiencing some different feelings right now because you know that your person is going to die. And so you may be grieving the loss of them before they're even gone, and normalizing that for them and kind of talking with them about how they may be experiencing those anticipatory grief feelings and how that may transition into their bereavement grief, and how those can be very similar, in establishing those coping skills then, even before their person is gone, if that makes sense. Yeah, Bonnie.
You're muted. Sorry.
Okay, yes. I was going to suggest that one of the things we use that could be used with teenagers and others is to ask, rather than how are you feeling, to say on a scale of 1 to 10, what's your feeling today?
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, I love that. I think that's a great idea. And we, I forget that a lot of the times when I'm meeting with kids in person, because I'm so used to talking about their feelings and their grief feelings, and their coping. But I have a once a month support group that I host for all of our kids. And in that support group, I have a little thermometer that talks about the different numbers that they can rate themselves on. So we focus a lot on that in group, but I tend to forget that when I'm meeting with families. So that's a great point.
Do you ever go in tandem with the spiritual counselor? I mean, you and I both know there's incredible variability in the drama in a home with the adults who are experiencing anticipatory grief, especially, and the children are exposed to this. Just some teaching of the parents about their effect on the children's grieving and perception of what's happening.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's a very fine line when you're talking to parents about that, of being accusatory versus being sympathetic and just educating them on, hey, just so you know, kids tend to mimic kind of or mirror how their family members are coping and how they're experiencing their grief. And so here are some resources just in case you need that, on how that affects the child and how you can mirror those good coping skills and that good communication with them, even now before their person dies. I don't go out with the chaplains or the social workers probably as much as I should, just because of the territory that I cover, but I always give them feedback after my visits and say, hey, you know what, I really noticed that mom is having a really hard time. And I had a case this last Friday, actually, where mom was so anxious about the impending death of her husband that she was projecting that onto her kids and saying that her kids were having such a hard time with this, when in reality, I met with the kids and they were coping pretty well, considering. And so I had to call the chaplain and just be like, hey, just so you know, this is kind of what's going on with mom. I think she would really benefit from some support. So that way these feelings aren't projected onto the kids. And then I also gave her some resources as well on how that can affect their coping moving forward. But it's just such a fine line, because you don't want to come off as accusatory and say you're doing something wrong in the midst of their grief, but at the same time educating them in a gentle way of this is something that could happen, and so just in case you need it, here are some resources for that.
I think Lenny Joe had a comment.
Okay, let's see.
In the text.
Oh, yes. Okay. So for a sudden death, you can still absolutely use these resources that I put into the presentation earlier. They are just a general community support. And so if anybody ever needs them for any type of death situation, whether it's sudden or a hospice experience, you can absolutely use those as well. And then also, I don't know if you guys are super familiar with play therapy, but that's another really great resource for families who do not have the opportunity to work with a child life specialist in a hospice setting. Play therapy is not the same, but it's very similar. And so having that instead of counseling and using that as a tool can be really beneficial too, especially for the younger kids who, like I said earlier, really benefit through play versus verbal communication at that age. And so that can be a really great resource. And there are an abundance of those around the community as well that can be really helpful.
Any other questions that people have? Any other comments, thoughts?
I'm so thankful for you. That's my comment. And
thank you.
I mean, just learning the difference in the way people perceive death, that was such an eye-opening bit of information for me.
Oh, well, good. I'm so glad that it was helpful. And, you know, my email is listed in that form that you guys are going to be getting. So if y'all have any questions, or if you come across something later on in life where you're like, you know what, I should probably ask Sarah about this, or maybe I need some resources on this. I also give out scripts to families as well about the certain diagnoses that we can see. And so how to best talk with them about that if parents are the ones who want to have those conversations versus me coming in and doing that. I highly encourage that. And so I wrote out scripts for families to be able to use. So if y'all ever need any resources, or if you have any questions, you're always welcome to reach out to me as well.
And it makes me realize or think more about legacy work with adults than perhaps we normally do.
Yeah.
Because how valuable that is moving
That was
forward.
Incredible to see just the different, and how within that space. Yeah. And that you're doing it not preemptively, but as a measure to engage with your children.
Yeah.
That's really beautiful.
Yeah. I feel like working in this field of work, you start to think, you know, in the future a little bit more about things. And I feel like you can never be overly prepared. And so that was kind of my thought for that was, you know, I'd rather have these things for later on and not need them, or them be an extra tool versus something that we actually need. So that was just kind of my thought.
Well, thank you so much. Oh, I see Mary Todd has her hand up.
Yeah, I had grandparent books that I gave to my mom to fill out for my children when they got older. And it was, you know, her memories of her childhood and stuff. But that's just one example sort of what you were talking about. And my grandchildren didn't get to know their grandfather because he died suddenly. And so, you know, the pictures that we do have are invaluable.
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing, you know, if you ever wanted to do this, and you know, it was something that you just felt in your heart you needed to do, you could always get one of those books and fill it out for him of the things that you know, and put pictures and stuff in there as well. So that way, I mean, those are just the coolest things, I feel like, because those are things that they can show their kids in the future about their family. And it's just something you can continuously pass down and look through when you're missing your person. So I think those are just the coolest things.
Well, thank you so much, Sarah.
You're
It's
welcome.
really incredible. Yeah, thanks, Steve, also for the rec. And
Thank y'all for having me. I appreciate it.
of course. Well, we did send out 2 emails, one with the bibliotherapy, and I have you CC'd on both of those. So
Okay,
you need
awesome.
to, get back to Sarah, and I'm going to print off that form and do it right now.
Thank you.
But,
I appreciate it.
yeah. Well, again, thank you for so much for your time and presence and your wisdom. It's really, you know, as a church, we stumbled onto this, or really kind of came into it thinking about just we've lost about 6-7 members and more family members associated over the last year, and not even necessarily due to COVID, but how we were experiencing the grief and the lack thereof of not being in person. And through one of our teams, education team, Steve had this idea of bringing this in. So to see it to come to fruition and how much we're learning and the resources that you've given are just invaluable. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. Well, thank you guys.
All right.
Like I said,
Yeah, I'll
I
share
was-
the recording if that's something you're comfortable with. And
Yep, that's absolutely fine.
awesome. All right. We'll see everyone later.